The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hello, I'm Seth Camillo.
And I am Caroline Risberg, and we are The Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are so very lucky to be joined by Dr. Suresh. Dr. Suresh is a professor at Brown University and a leading expert on algorithmic fairness and tech policy. He recently served in the White House under the Biden administration, shaping national AI policy and helping to create the AI Bill of Rights. So we are very, very lucky to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
And I think the first question, we all say algorithm. You know, everybody says that. What is an algorithm?
That's a great question. And that's something, we cover in our classes in computer science and in so many other places. And I think simply put, an algorithm at its most basic level is like a recipe. So you're cooking, you have ingredients. Those are your inputs into the recipe. There are instructions in the recipe, and you produce some output, hopefully something delicious to eat. An algorithm is like that. It's trying to solve a problem. So the problem might be, bake a chocolate cake. And the algorithm be, well, here are the inputs you need. You need, flour, you need sugar, you need chocolate, and you can tell I don't bake, and and so all these things. And you have instructions for how to combine them and what you have to do. And hopefully the recipe is sufficiently detailed that you can perform each step.
Okay.
Now, unlike, with a recipe where, I could take a recipe and try to produce a chocolate cake, and, my wife would take the same recipe and produce chocolate cake, and hers would be way better than mine because I don't know how to bake. With an algorithm, in principle, if it should be sufficiently well defined that any computer can follow instructions and produce the same output. Right. And so that's the goal, right? It should be sufficiently well defined that there's no ambiguity in it. At least that's a classical definition of an algorithm from way back in the early days of computer science from 50 years ago.
And so how does an algorithm make a decision? Non-AI, just a regular, what happens when you feed it? Because we interviewed somebody, you might be familiar with his work, Dr. Eckdale of the University of Iowa, but he was doing a big study where he was seeing what goes into a Facebook search or something and what comes out, because it was impossible to know what was happening in between. So how does an algorithm take my information and decide to assign it to something?
So let's take an example of, say, algorithms that are used, for example, to make hiring decisions as to, you do an initial filtering interview, and then they decide, should you go to the next level in the process, right? Let's say, for argument's sake, that it's a simple non-video thing. There's a questionnaire, you fill out some questions, you give some answers, and then you're evaluated, right? So what the algorithm might be programmed to do in this case, or what the algorithm might be written to do, is to look at the answers, compare the answer to, say, a rubric, a template answer. If it's a long essay form, do some evaluation, which is itself another algorithm. So let's pretend we know how to do it for now. Get a bunch of scores for these different things, combine them in some way, which again, someone has to write down the set of rules to combine these numbers in some way, and spit out a final score. And then someone or another algorithm decide, okay, based on the score, it's above 73, this person goes to the next level, or it's below 73, this person doesn't go to the next. There's a whole bunch of decisions that get made, design decisions by people to how this is going to go now. And that's an example of an algorithm that would be one small algorithm that's used in the first stage of a hiring pipeline.
How do you make something fair that's an algorithm, and it also goes to media literacy, as hopefully our viewers are as sort of mystified as we are, because you're giving us the basic building blocks that I think everybody needs to know in the modern era, right? These are things, and we need to know about algorithmic fairness, but how do you make something fair?
Yeah.
I think the first question to ask, and this is a typical professor thing to do, to refuse to answer your question and tell you to ask a different one.
Do that.
But the first question to ask is not so much what makes an algorithm fair, is like, why would it ever not be?
Oh, yes.
Boom.
Like, why do we have this presumption of guilt, right? What's the problem? Why would an algorithm have a problem? And to do that, we need to understand the particular kinds of algorithms that show up when we use AI or machine learning, right? which is the more specific thing. So I said algorithms are everywhere, right? But the algorithms that get used a lot nowadays are based on machine learning, which is a subfield of AI, which basically amounts to trying to, and this is going to sound a little weird, build an algorithm to build an algorithm.
Okay, that does sound weird. Go ahead.
Yeah, it does sound weird, right? What I mean? In other words, what I mean by this is that the way machine learning works is to take a bunch of data, and I'll say in a second where the data comes from, and try to find patterns in that data that could be used to write down an algorithm. Right? Remember we were talking about the filtering search. Oh, we should filter for certain keywords for a job.
Yes.
Suppose we didn't know what the right keywords were. We might say, okay, let's take all the resumes we got from people for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
And mark off the people who were successful in the job and the people who weren't, and say what was in their resume. We don't know what's in their resume that might be a good signal for whether they're going to be successful or not. Let's try to learn keywords that might be indicative of success, even though we don't know what they are. And so the machine learning system will crunch away for a while and output and come up with some keywords, and that will be used to write an algorithm.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
That I
Okay.
So the algorithms that get used in all these settings that we hear about a lot are ones that are built by training on lots and lots of data. Now, where does the data come from? In this particular example, it could be just very specific data in the past for this job in this company. It could be data collected from a bunch of companies in the similar space doing similar things. It could be data that seems unrelated to the job, like about your personality. And so you see this larger edifice of surveillance to collect all kinds of data, including like social media data, that might in some way provide some clues as to someone's fit for the position or they're fit to go to the next level. And so if you train a system with data that has its own weird skews and patterns and biases of various kinds, the system will learn those biases. And so back to the original question of how to make a machine unfair, how an algorithm can be unfair and how to make it fair, this is how it can become unfair in the first place. If there is data it's training on that's biased. And since we use a lot of historical data, as you can imagine, if you're using historical data to decide who gets a loan or who gets a job or who gets admitted to college, you start seeing the issues that can come into play.
People run into maybe hundreds of algorithms a day in our modern life, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's something we
All the
have
time.
to understand. I mean, Google is a huge player, not just in giving you information, but their quote unquote algorithm or what brings back the information that you seek has a huge impact on the United States and the world in general. That algorithm is has become incredibly important to the future of our country and the world.
And this is not going to endear me to Mark Zuckerberg or make him want to offer me $100 million pay package, but the tech companies have a somewhat vested interest in presenting a view of AI and algorithms that is both complex and murky and confusing, so that they can say, just trust us.
Just trust us. Just trust us.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they're doing this in a bad way. I'm just saying they are an actor and they have their own incentives on how they talk about this. And that's unfortunately how we hear about a lot of the discussion around AI and algorithms, especially around AI. And you're right that, media literacy for all of us is very important. So we can understand not that whether they're wrong or right, that's not the point, but have our own grounded understanding. And if you get a computer science degree, you get that, but not everyone gets one and not everyone needs to get one to understand these things. It's important for all of us.
I'll bring up the example that Caroline pointed out a couple weeks ago or something. So we make little ads and I often use Chat GPT to Dolly, I guess it's officially Dolly, is their image creation. And she said, why is everybody you have in your ads white? And I had never thought about it, but it's true. I rarely, if ever, get a minority. It's not something I'm thinking about at the time, but when she said it, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, that's true. When I put in lawyer, I don't get a black man. When I put in, so something, is it me or is it them?
It's a mix.
Okay.
It's not that it's you. It's just that and that's why these systems are so complicated. I doubt even folks at OpenAI or folks at Google in the search can tell you exactly why it is you get the results you get.
It's actually quite frightening, actually, what power these algorithms have. I mean, they tell the story of the world to people, really. I mean, it's how most of us get our information nowadays
Yeah.
is through algorithms, and that has an immense impact. Like, if I were to look up the big beautiful bill, I'm on 7 different AI, Google, Yahoo, whatever, all over the place. I'm going to get very different responses.
But it's unclear, and I say, I'm going to use this word a lot because I just don't know. It's unclear how good these systems are at manifesting and showing to us the different perspectives, especially perspectives that are not the majority. Because again, these work on data, and the more data on a particular perspective, the more that's going to surface to the top in some ways.
Well, I consider myself not a easily fooled human being, but I think it's 1/4 of Gen Z believe that, uh, these LLMs, choose your flavor, are sentient. And at times, to be honest with you, even
Mm-hmm.
as an adult person who's got college degrees and stuff, it feels very like a personal relationship. I mean, it does do that to me.
I think, I won't speak for all computer science researchers. I'll just speak for myself. I have been amazed at how um, articulate and how fluid ChatGPT's responses to me, even on very arcane technical topics. I tried, for example, a Notebook LM, which is this thing that Google has for doing research, right?
Yeah.
I threw in some very technical math papers, 2 papers on a particular topic in linear algebra. I said, there's no way, it's supposed to be able to generate a podcast from the papers of 2 people talking to them about the paper. I said, okay, it's quite technical. There's no way it can do that. It was not bad. It was, so,
Really?
I think for those of us who work in the field and see what these systems can do, we're also quite impressed by what they're able to produce, and we're also kind of puzzled as to how this happens. And I
Yeah.
think that's where a lot of the excitement in research is, to figure out exactly how these things are happening and make some sense of it.
Why don't we shift gears just a little bit, which is to say, you've now explained what an algorithm is.
I mean, yeah.
We're not ready for the test yet, but we've got some idea of what an algorithm is. But what
I
about
won't quiz you, I promise. Yeah.
what about I mean, you've been heavily involved in the ethical. You've spoken before Congress. You were part
Yeah.
of the Bill of Rights, right? The AI Bill of
Yeah.
Rights. It was something you were a big part of putting together. So you've thought a lot deeply about the ethics of these algorithms. Can you introduce that idea to us? Because I think that's something that many people, many of our listeners will have never crossed their mind, which is the ethics of algorithms and how that does affect everyday life and absolutely enormous decisions like who gets a job,
Yeah.
etc.
These algorithms are controlling how we see the world. That in some ways encapsulates the fact that algorithms, AI, whatever you want to call it, are a critical piece of how we make sense of the world, and therefore bring in concerns about whether we are getting what we want. Now, the ethics of algorithms, there are many questions that one could unpack, right? And so you mentioned one of them, which is the focused question of decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I don't mean decision making in it, hey, Netflix, what should I watch tonight? I think it is an important decision. Or which music should I listen to on Spotify? And Spotify has this AI DJ that recommends music to me. Those are important decisions, but I'm not talking about those. I can, but not right now. What I want to talk about are decisions that affect our civil rights, our civil liberties, our ability to progress and succeed in this world, our ability to get, value and benefits from the government that the government is supposed to give to us, or that, that the government is promised to give to, and things like that. So let's talk more narrowly about that space of things, right? So whether, it's not as well known, it's because it's not as visible, but in almost any sphere of the world that we interact with now, where decisions are being made about our lives, there are algorithms involved in this. So let's start from the beginning, right? Where you go to college, where you get a job, whether you get a loan, what kind of loan you get, on what terms, where you get an apartment, how much rent you pay for the apartment, whether you can buy a house and get a mortgage, how that house you're buying is appraised.
So everything you're mentioning right now touches an algorithm.
Yeah. And I haven't even got to healthcare or insurance.
Yeah, I know. Get there.
Yeah. What kind of treatments you get, what kind of treatments you're approved for by insurance, right?
Wow. Yeah.
What nature of care you should get, or what kind of diagnostic tool, or what kind of medicine, what kind of insurance coverage you should be offered.
So you are a co-author of the AI Bill of Rights, and who should, how should, and what should be regulated? How do we do this to keep it fair? And I know the companies are saying we want to regulate ourselves. Well, and the current administration might agree with that, but what is, in your opinion, the best way? Obviously, you can't make things perfect, but what, in your estimation, is the best way to regulate the fairness of algorithms?
One of the interesting things about AI regulation is that a large portion of it is not about fairness, not about ethics. It's just about, excuse my language, making sure the damn things work.
Okay.
That's just like a basic bar we would like to cross first.
Okay.
And it's kind of shocking how we don't even cross that bar. So the first principle in the AI Bill of Rights, there are 5 of them, right? So the first one is make sure systems are safe, don't hurt people, and effective. Do what they claim to do before we put them out. AI uses a heck ton of data.
Yeah.
As a result of that, there is increasing ever more desire to just collect as much data as possible, because maybe it'll be helpful. We don't know, but why not just collect it anyway? So you have data brokers, you have third party, you have a huge business, billions and trillions of dollars involved in collecting, surveilling, and selling our data to brokers who will then sell it to other people. And, the recent shooting of the Minnesota legislators.
Yeah.
The guy who did it used basically third-party data brokers to figure out their addresses.
Wow.
And that's not that's the most recent example, but there are so many. 23andMe's data hack, for example, and all the genetic data that was leaked from that.
That's amazing.
The fact that we build this infrastructure of AI and this sea and ocean of data that's just unregulated, unchecked in the US at least. In the Europe, they have more protections on data than the US, means that a lot of things can happen with data once it's collected and sold all over the place. That is both bad for us, but also destroys any meaning that was in the data to begin with, right? If I went to a party and I posted some pictures of the party, I had some fun with my friends, that makes sense in that context. But if someone were to use a picture of me having fun at the party to decide whether I'm loan worthy, I think we'd all be a little upset with that, because that was not the context. But that is something that people are proposing to do because they have access to data, because they can snarf people's social media feeds.
Okay.
If a 21-year-old kid, my kids are that age, they say something silly on social media, does that mean they should not be allowed into the US to apply for grad school as the current administrator? And I don't want to get too political here, but the fact that this data exists and therefore can be used, whether it's meaningful or not, is another problem. So the third principle in the AI Bill of Rights is that our data should be used sparingly and conservatively, and only for the purpose in which it was collected, not for just all kinds of rather random purposes. And this is a core component of data protection law across the world, but not in the US, because we failed to pass data protection law at the federal level, even though some states have it. So that's number 3. Number 4 is if it's all secret and you don't know what's happening, you can't do anything to begin with. It's almost like the zeroth order thing, right? If I don't know an algorithm is being used to talk to me when I'm booking like a restaurant, I don't know anything about anything. I can't even start to begin to say, is it doing the right thing or not?
Yeah.
And so this idea of we should know that algorithms are being used, that AI is being used to interact with us, and that we should have some way to say, why is it doing what it's doing? If an AI system is being used to say, well, you shouldn't get this medicine, you should get that, maybe I don't need to know all the details, but actually some understanding of why. And more importantly, if it's saying you don't get a loan or you do get a loan, So know why.
Why
In
am
fact,
I
there's
not?
a law from the 70s that says if you get denied a loan, the loan denier has to tell you why. Right? So this is not even an unusual thing to ask for in the age of AI. It's just like, we've done this before. We should just do this now. So this idea of explanation and understanding why these systems are behaving the way they are is a core principle. And finally,
Mm.
we have what I'll call the dial zero for operator principle, right? Systems will break. They will fail. We've all had frustrations with our printers or with our projectors or with our screens or with Zoom. If you're going to put algorithms in mission critical situations where people's lives and livelihoods are at stake, there has to be able to say, I'd like to talk to a real person, please. So there should be human fail-safes, human accountability, a way for, you're going to vote and there's some electronic system that's checking your ID or checking, something to make sure you're a valid voter and makes any glitches. Should you not be able to vote, or should there be another person you can talk to and look, here's who I am and here's why I can vote here? Yes. And it should be right there. It shouldn't be like you can apply a week later and hope to get, no. And so these are the 5 principles. You want safety and effectiveness, you want lack of bias, you want data protection, you want clarity and explanations, and you want dial zero for operator. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
How far away are we from having anything that comes anywhere near that?
I have a very different answer if you ask me this question in, I don't know, November 1, 2024 and November 6th, 2024.
Yeah, it's okay. All right.
Okay.
So we were making headway at the federal level. I think there was a lot of interest in pushing things forward. It was slow, but that was, I think, okay, because people need to get used to, need to get comfortable with how to do this. The states have been pushing very aggressively on this. States have been passing or trying to pass all kinds of laws around regulation of AI, which has been, I would say, encouraging in many ways. I mean, Texas just passed something like 2 days ago. I haven't looked at the details of the bill, but they passed something. And so that's been going on as well. The federal regulatory agencies in the past administration were sort of saying, if you make claims about your system, your AI system, and in fact it's discriminatory, we're going to come after you for making false claims. So the FTC was going after companies making false claims about the systems. The other regulatory agencies that look at discrimination in loans and hiring were looking at it as well.
If you had asked me a year ago, would you mind if your films were used as training data? I would have said, no, of course not. Stay away from my films. It's copyrighted. But then I have been caught up into the nationalism, really, of it, to thinking, well, okay, yeah, use my films. You're not going to sell the film. You're going to sell the, it's fair use, the fair use doctrine. And because I feel sort of a national pride or a national desire that we win, quote unquote. And I know that, like, my dad only went and got his PhD because of Sputnik. And that was people trying to win. And I feel like we're getting wrapped up into that sort of attitude.
The thing that's interesting about the space race, right, is it, setting aside, other dimensions to that, again, another very complex topic, right? It was a race between the US and the Soviet Union at the time. There was wrapped up in communism and anti-communism rhetoric. And but NASA, a government agency, which I should point out, is being horribly defunded by the current legislation in place, was in charge of running. So it was a government entity, all right? In principle, accountable to the taxpayers, that was doing this for the benefit of the country. When OpenAI claims they're doing this for the benefit of the country, you got to ask, wait, whose benefit is this here?
Yeah.
Is the US benefiting from OpenAI, or is OpenAI benefiting from OpenAI?
Yeah.
I think it's of course they want to wrap themselves in the space race and the flag because it suits their purpose. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not making any friends with the tech companies by saying this, but we have to be very careful when we think about the rhetoric of a race here, especially since the entity we're putting as the enemy, China, has way more regulation on AI than we do.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Okay.
Much more.
Really?
And I'm not saying that their regulation is something we should adopt, but in China, if you're a social media company, a couple of years ago, the Chinese government put out a rule saying you have to get your algorithms vetted by the government. Can you imagine Facebook having to vet their algorithms with the US government?
Oh, yeah.
I cannot.
That's what China does. Now, they have their own reasons. And, they're not exactly a free speech bastion. Neither anymore are we, it seems, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of regulation on their systems. They have not got caught up in the, we must avoid regulation in order to succeed. They're like, no, we're going to regulate very heavily, and we're going to pour a ton of money into research.
Yes.
They're doing all the things that we should be doing, that we've done for 70 years and 80 years in the US to get this far ahead, and that we're suddenly stopping right now.
Yeah.
At the exact wrong time. So if we actually did care about competing with China, setting aside whether rhetoric is useful or not at the national level, there are things we would be doing that we're not doing at all. And so if you look at the actions versus the rhetoric, you say, okay, if you said you wanted to do this, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the problem I have with the language of the space race, is that it doesn't seem to match what's actually happening on the ground, right? The US government, I mean, most of the infrastructure that I benefit from as an academic in the US was US government funds poured into research at public universities as part of this broader mission, which had like Russia as a threat thing, we need to keep up. And when Vannevar Bush put out his article I think in the early 50s, his big report that laid the groundwork for this, he didn't say we should fund the private sector. He said very clearly, we need to fund universities, we need to fund the public sector, and companies will benefit them, but we should not focus on them. So I find it very hard to parse this rhetoric right now as being anything other than disingenuous.
I think that people don't one thing I would say as an aside is people do not realize, how golden the last 70 years has been through academic research. I was a professor for a while, so maybe I'm a little bit have my own opinions, but I think this pulling money out of universities and pulling talent out of universities. I mean, my dad, the math department is half people who were not born in America and whose first language is not English. We are poaching the smartest people in the world and bringing them to the United States and getting the benefit of that. I mean,
this is very personal for me. I came here to study to get a PhD from India, right? And I stayed here because the US was the place where everyone had to go to do this work. And it is very concerning when you see that, because it's not, and again, self-serving university professor, of course I'll say academic research is important, but it was the pipeline, right? There was academic research. There were companies that were hiring people from the universities. I mean, where does OpenAI, I think they get their people from? They get the people from my universities. They train, we train them and they go and work there. And they would go and work at these companies, bring that knowledge in, innovate. I mean, every single thing we take for granted about the internet, about the web, about social media, it goes back to, university research, industry research, but also government funding.
Studying up for this interview, I was asking ChatGPT about, agents. And I said, so should I give my credit card to an agent? And it said, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Not yet. Don't do anything like that yet. But
so one way to think about agents is that because we have built systems that seem to be so good at interacting with people, like these LLMs, we build smaller versions of them that can go and interact on their own with people or with other agents. And then function like the one use case would be, I need to book this trip to Hawaii. I could go to ChatGPT, ask a bunch of questions, get a bunch of information, and go book my tickets. Or I could say, okay, now go book the tickets. And that's where the agent sort of pitch is coming in, right? It'll do all that stuff for you. Or it might, automatically manage it and things like that. So your question about what we do about agentic AI, I'm going to say the same thing I said before. I don't know. This is an even more sort of new and emerging area where researchers are beginning to think about this. There's been some people who've been writing about, how to think about the ethics of agents. There's a very nice article from DeepMind, of all places, that is laid out a bunch of these questions, no answers yet. There's been researchers across, the world who are beginning to think about that, but it's still very early stages in agents. And none of the questions about trust and reliability have gone away, but they've been now compounded by the fact that these unreliable, untrustworthy objects are now in the world interacting.
Well, your Bill of Rights that you enumerated was not a regulation; it is a state of mind. And so if they operate within the right state of mind, then it would naturally occur, I guess.
And a not so secret of the AI Bill of Rights that people are very shocked about when they pay attention is that we don't define AI anywhere. And we do this deliberately.
Okay.
Because we are not concerned about the particular aspects of the technology so much as the impact.
Very clever.
Interesting.
It would be
Yeah.
like,
we got a lot of people telling us we were not being clever when we did that.
I think it's clever.
Thank you. But there was a lot of pushback on that because
No, I think
lawyers
it's
like
Yeah.
very
definitions.
clever because what is the definition? I mean, yeah, what I have a lot of trouble with this. And as I mean, both Caroline and I, it's almost like we're self-taught, right? We're filmmakers and we're
Yeah.
trying to understand,
We try to understand.
and not only do we deal with, we might one day be dealing with the socioeconomic impacts, and the next day we might deal with art. So we have this broad, swath of things we're responsible for knowing. And I do find myself putting into Chat GPT a lot of times just trying to get basic definitions and pounding my head against the wall. And I think it is so clever because these definitions don't exist. I mean, E equals MC squared is a simple thing, but the outcome of it will never be understood fully. And to try
Nuclear bomb, nuclear energy, it all comes to the same thing.
Mhm.
exactly. So I think not having it defined, first of all, I think that's smart. And second of all, I think it helps me personally understand that there may not be definitions for these things. And that may be the big takeaway in a certain sense, that it's not, these things are going to morph into who knows what it will be in 20 years, right?
The thing with definitions is that right now, because we're playing essentially a cat and mouse game
Mm-hmm.
with those who would like to evade any regulation, is that the minute you put on a definition, someone decides that what they're doing is not that thing. And so it
Mm.
becomes very tricky once you put on a definition to play the whack-a-mole game
Yeah.
of trying to figure out what people are now saying that this is the reason why the definition of AI keeps shifting is because every time someone says, well, this is what AI is and we're going to put rules on this, like, oh, no, we're not doing that. We're doing this other thing.
But it is like a Bill of Rights. I mean, it is like because it is, it's why the Bill of Rights has survived so long is because it is not definitional in the sense that it doesn't define specific things, but it defines ideas, I guess.
Right.
And
That's
that's
right.
it.
As you said, it's a state of mind. That's a
Yeah.
very good way to put it. And another thing, and I'll go on my soapbox a little bit here, and I say this often, is that, you both of you refer regularly to the fact that you're filmmakers, you're not computer scientists. This is very overwhelming. This is technically difficult. One of the things that we were trying to capture in the AI Bill of Rights, right, is that you don't have to be a technical expert to articulate what matters in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't
Thank you.
have to.
No.
And that's important.
Very.
And so there's a constant effort to push people out of the conversation because you don't have the technical expertise to do so. And as someone with the technical expertise to have these conversations, I can say that most of what we talk about is not about the technical details, but it's about what we want from society and what we want from our world. And that's a conversation we should all be having,
Yes.
not just the people who build the systems. But I think we need to ask ourselves, when we use these systems, are they working in our interest or in the interest of the entity that's desperately trying to make money off of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't
Yeah.
have to be totally misaligned. The market incentive is not a bad incentive, but they can be. And I think right now we're in a place where there's much more of a push. Right now, there's a much more push to control market share and gain market share and be China, whatever, than make sure systems are safe for people. And that's where the pendulum is and might change. But right now, that's where we are. And that's my expert judgment on this.
Well, I think that's a
Yeah.
wonderful place to wrap this up.
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much for making my head hurt, but also I feel positive and negative at the same time. I'm gonna have to work through all these deep ideas.
Yeah. I really like this, and and thank you, because you actually explain it, and I want to say thank you for what you're doing.
And I want to say, I want to thank you all also for what you do because, it's so important that people across the country and the world understand these issues.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's a collective effort, right? We all work together for that.
Exactly.
And the place you all occupy, the place journalism occupies, is tremendously important.
Yes.
It is.
I'm just a researcher doing my work and trying to advise, and I cannot reach broad audiences the way you can. You understand how to reach people in a way that I will never be able to. And that's a key part of this ecosystem as well. And I say it in the ecosystem because we all benefit from each other's presence in this space.
Yes.
So what you do is very important, and keep doing it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
really, really
Thank you.
appreciate it. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Tune in next week when we have another great conversation about robotics, AI, and the internet. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.